and from historical experiences that 6 months, a year down the track, the number of adverse events from a psychiatric point of view goes way up.
Right.
And, we can go back to Thatcher's Britain. In fact, we can go before Thatcher's Britain and show that over and over again.
Just finally, Chris, there's a delicate balance, isn't there? There was a very interesting article, I think, was it in The Guardian, that was saying that often pandemics don't end medically, but often they end because people are actually just sick and tired of being in a pandemic historically, so they'll force the reopening. It's that important for us to get back to normal.
Yeah. I think very much so that if you over-regulate and you micro-regulate people, there will be a point where people just say no. If you continue to restrict businesses will open because the alternative is that the bills don't get paid and nobody earns. People will start ignoring regulations. So one of the things that any government's got to do at the moment is balance the intrusiveness and the onerousness of the regulations with the health benefits. And that is a pretty careful calculus. You've got, if you like, three arms. One is the biology of the virus or the epidemic you're worried about. The second is the social and psychological cost from over-restriction, economic downturns and a propaganda of worry. And the third is what people can tolerate.
Good to have you.
And we haven't tolerated certain things if we go back long enough.
Yeah. Dr. Christopher Gale, consultant psychiatrist and senior lecturer at Otago University, thank you very much for your time. And in terms of level 2, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister, said just a few minutes ago, Phil, she's looking forward to giving her sister a hug because she hasn't been home to see her in a couple of months. What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to a haircut. Even a bald guy like me does like that. But I agree with that completely. The idea of being able to hug someone, potentially shake a hand, someone I know pretty well and can feel safe around. I think I'm looking forward to that more than you might imagine. As a matter of fact, I'm a particularly I enjoy that warmth of human contact, so I'll certainly be looking forward to that.
Extraordinary, isn't it, when you think about it, Whatamata? Going without social contact, physical contact, there would have been a limit as to how long we could have kept that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, likewise, I'm looking forward to probably reconnect with 5 people as well as getting my eyebrows done. But yeah, we, as human beings, we are social. We do need that connection. And I think there's only so long that we can be deprived of that. And it is so important. We know from psychology and children when they're young how important that is for their well-being. And I think even as you grow older, it's probably just as important, if not more.
Well, it's lovely to have you both on. Thank you very much for being with us, albeit a shortened panel. Phil O'Reilly, business leader and cultural rights and women's advocate, Whatamata Bath, thank you very much for your time. Checkpoint is next. Follow the latest analysis to come out of the latest announcement. We're going to level 2 on Checkpoint, and I'm with you back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see ya.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, level 2, here we come. Jacinda Ardern announces a staged descent to level 2. Restaurants, malls, cafes, cinemas, hairdressers and gyms will go first on Thursday. Schools will follow next Monday and bars in time for the following weekend. House parties, funerals, stags and church gatherings are still limited to a maximum of 10 people. And if you're planning a big fat Kiwi wedding, the Prime Minister's advice is hold off. The rules will be reviewed in 2 weeks, but how will the new normal be policed? Minister Grant Robertson joins us live. Sky City looks to slash 700 jobs on top of 200 already axed, and New Zealand's long haul back from this pandemic got longer.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. New Zealand will begin shifting to Alert Level 2 from Thursday, with retail stores, malls, restaurants and cafes all allowed to reopen. The same goes for cinemas, public playgrounds and gyms, though all businesses will have to operate under strict hygiene and distancing requirements. People will be allowed to break their bubbles and travel freely around the country. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says people must keep their private gatherings to no more than 10 people.
I know that many New Zealanders are looking forward to catching up with friends and family, and from this Thursday you can. But for now, as I've said, it just needs to be small.
In a notable exception to the Level 2 transition, bars will have to remain closed for an extra week.
We have left bars till last because they do pose the most risk. As we can see from South Korea, that recently opened up their bars only to close them again after one person created an outbreak of 40 people and caused 1,500 tests.
Jacinda Ardern says all schools and early learning centres will reopen on Monday. A union representing Sky City workers says the company could stave off some redundancies as the economy opens up again. Sky City is looking at cutting almost 1 in 5 of its staff as it struggles with no visitors to its casinos, bars and hotels. To stem this, the company today proposed slashing another 700 jobs to go with the 200 that went last month. Jared Hare from the Unite Union says he hopes the company genuinely looks at all the options and tries to keep as many people as possible.
Things aren't as bad as they looked only a month ago. If there is a trans-Tasman bubble, that should actually weigh on the proceedings and the outcome. And also, we've got a budget coming up this week. I'd be stunned if there wasn't some specific support for the hospitality industry in particular.
Jared Hare. Westpac says some of its card services are working again, but it's still experiencing a widespread network outage. The bank's website, online banking, card services and contact centre went down early this afternoon. A bank spokesperson says tech staff have identified the problem and are working to fix it. The bank says some credit card services are now back working, so if customers' EFTPOS card is not working, they should try their credit card. Westpac says it can't say when services will be back to normal. The country's biggest fuel retailer says the COVID-19 pandemic has costed more than $30 million and it's bracing for a protracted hit on its finances. Z Energy reported a bottom-line loss of $88 million for the year ended March, compared with a profit of $186 million the year before, which included large asset write-downs. Stripping out one-off costs, the company made a profit of $44 million a quarter of a year ago. Z's chief executive Mike Bennett says its margins have been savaged by competition, the pandemic and a slump in oil prices.
So a year ago it was 4.3 cents a litre. And, on an underlying basis, it's down to about 3.5 cents a litre. So it's still a very, very modest cents per litre profit, and it's down 20% on what we achieved the year before.
Mike Bennett says Z Energy is beefing up its finances through a $350 million share issue to see it through the tough times ahead. Children in New South Wales and Queensland return to the classroom today. For some, it's been 6 weeks since they've been at school. Our World Watch reporter Max Toll has more.
The issue of when to return has been a divisive one in Australia. At times, some states have been at odds with the federal government, which is urging public schools to fully reopen by next month. For now, children in New South Wales and Queensland are back in lessons on a limited basis, starting with 1 day a week. Final year students can attend at least 3 days per week. The size of classes is reduced and pupils are kept away from each other where possible. At some schools, parents aren't allowed past the gate, while thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer have been supplied by the government. This is Max Toll.
It's 4 minutes past 5. Sport this afternoon. A start date has been confirmed for the domestic Super Rugby competition involving all 5 New Zealand teams. Following confirmation, the country will move to Alert Level 2 on Thursday. New Zealand Rugby have announced a 10-week competition will kick off on June 13th. Meanwhile, a full 14-team National Provincial Championship will kick off in September. NZR says they're continuing to look at options for the Women's National Provincial Championship and Black Ferns matches. The Warriors Rugby League team have taken another step towards normality as the resumption of the NRL season looms closer. 1 week through their 2-week isolation in the rural New South Wales town of Tamworth, the New Zealand club have been able to return to full contact training this afternoon. While the players were keen to ramp things up, second rower Lachlan Burr says they'll be easing into it.
We're not going to go full contact. So I think we're going to do a bit of pad work and then do a bit of wrestling on the ground and things like that. And I think we're just going to take small steps into building into that full 13 on 13 contact. So just easing into it.
Lachlan Burr. And that's the news.
Life under level 2.
Bubbles are going to be burst, no more bubbles, so people will be interacting a lot more with strangers. It's not always going to be possible, of course, to maintain that strict social distancing.
As businesses excited.
So there'll be some businesses and some industries that will be able to open up a relatively unfettered fashion. But in other industries like retail, hospo, it's still going to be pretty tough.
And potential for more trade with China.
China has been for quite some time now, probably one of the more active online shoppers probably in the world.
Doing the business. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday from Met Service, updated less than an hour ago. For all of the North Island, cloudy periods. Isolated showers from Northland to Coromandel, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper Coast. For Nelson, mostly cloudy, a few showers, clearing up tomorrow afternoon. Buller through to Fiordland, rain becoming widespread this evening, some heavy falls about the ranges, clearing in Buller and Fiordland tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with increasing high cloud today, patchy rain and low cloud in Canterbury tomorrow with a southerly change coming through. Otago and Southland, high cloud, scattered rain this evening. High cloud clearing in Southland tomorrow at the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul, and you're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. We're ready. The day we've waited almost 7 weeks for. Just 2 more sleeps before New Zealand makes a staggered move to level 2 at 11:59 on Wednesday. Retail stores, malls, gyms, cinemas, restaurants, hairdressers, playgrounds and movie theatres will be allowed to reopen from this Thursday. Schools will reopen next Monday, May 18, and bars will be able to reopen from Thursday, May 21st. Social gatherings will be limited to 10, although these guidelines will be reviewed in a fortnight, depending on the number of reported daily cases. Strict border controls will remain. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, made Cabinet's announcement a short time ago.
We are ready to move into level 2, to open up the economy, but to do it as safely as possible. So let me set out how we will do that. On Thursday this week, retail, malls, cafes, restaurants, cinemas, and other public spaces, including playgrounds and gyms, can reopen. All will be required to have physical distancing and strict hygiene measures in place. You can begin to move around New Zealand, but space yourself out, especially if you're using public transport. And of course, health services will restart. On Monday, 18 May, all children and young people will be able to return to school and early learning. This staging is to give parents, teachers and education facilities time to plan. And finally, on Thursday, 21 May, bars will be able to open with all the requirements set out last week, including that seating must be provided, there must be space between tables, and there mustn't be multiple waiters and waitresses serving a single table. We have left bars till last because they do pose the most risk. As we can see from South Korea that recently opened up their bars only to close them again after one person created an outbreak of 40 people and caused 1,500 tests. While we have put in place measures and expectations to make all hospitality as safe as possible, these few extra days really do give us a chance to lock in the data from level 3 and feel more secure that we're ready for this move. Overall, though, the upshot is that in 10 days' time, we will have reopened most businesses in New Zealand, and sooner than many other countries around the world. But that fits with our plan, and our plan was go hard, go early, so we can get our economy moving again sooner, and so we can get the economic benefit of getting our health response right. And so far, we have.
10, remember that number. A maximum of 10 people will be allowed at all social gatherings. This will include weddings, funerals and church gatherings. The Prime Minister said whilst the government was relaxing rules, the situation in South Korea, where the virus has spread after their lockdown was lifted, illustrated the importance of social distancing. For that reason, she said restaurants would not be permitted to take bookings for more than 10 people.
parties, big social events, or anything designed to be for mixing and mingling won't be allowed to happen for groups that are larger than 10. Gatherings at home need to be kept at 10. Church and religious events, weddings, funerals, stag do's, all limited to 10 for now. And if you're wanting to head to a restaurant or a bar, they won't be able to take group bookings for larger than 10. This, alongside social distancing, is our insurance policy. And why 10? Simple. If something goes wrong with a group of 10, that is much easier to contain, much easier to contact trace, much less likely that if something goes wrong, the whole country will have to experience more restrictions. That doesn't mean that you won't see larger gatherings of people around you. People, for instance, will be at the movies, but they'll all be spaced out. They'll be watching sports, but they will be spaced out. People might go to a show, but they will be spaced out. You'll see bars and restaurants open, but they again will be required to have people seated and spaced out. We have done what we can to prioritise opening up businesses, but just alter the way that we work within them for the next wee while.
Family members will be allowed to visit loved ones in rest homes but will be strictly monitored. And despite international advice to the contrary, masks will not be required here on public transport. Jacinda Ardern said going hard and going fast had put New Zealand in a better position than most other countries. And there was a number of factors behind today's decision.
Case numbers remain low. And in the last week, we have had 2 days in a row of no cases. By the end of level 4, our R value, the number of people each case goes on to infect, was 0.4. Under level 3, it has remained low. Experts tell us that if the R value stays below 1, we will eventually achieve our goal of elimination. As of today, we have only 90 New Zealanders recorded as having the virus, of whom only 2 are in hospital. None of that has been through luck, but rather through hard work. While we've been battling this virus, we've also built up our health system to specifically act as a defence. We can now undertake up to 12,000 tests a day. 3.5% of the entire population has been tested, and our testing rates are amongst the highest in the world per capita, ahead of countries like Australia, the UK, Germany, Singapore and South Korea. A lot of work has gone into building up our contact tracing capability. Dr. Aisha Verrill's report has been instrumental in this regard, and the majority of the recommendations have been implemented. We can now contact trace 185 cases a day and have capacity to contact 10,000 people a day through a new national call centre established since the beginning of the outbreak. Identifying new cases of the virus quickly through testing and rapid contact tracing can be 90% as effective as a vaccine in stopping the spread of the virus.
The Prime Minister, who was accompanied by the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said a continued low number of daily case numbers would dictate when we move to level 1. She also indicated there would be more support for small businesses announced in this Thursday's budget. Meanwhile, Checkpoint can reveal that a woman who tested positive for COVID at the weekend had been in an Auckland jail for 10 days after allegedly refusing to undergo a medical examination when she arrived in Auckland from the United States. The woman in her 20s agreed to be tested when she appeared in court last Friday. She was bailed after it was confirmed she had been tested, but before the result was known. The Department of Corrections says during her time at Auckland Women's Prison, the woman was quarantined and had no contact with other prisoners. It says staff are required to wear full PPE, including eye protection, gloves and masks when dealing with someone suspected or confirmed to have COVID. They say the woman had her own exercise area and was provided with a phone in her cell for calls, and that was sanitised after each use. The cell where she was housed has since been deep cleaned. Corrections can't yet say if any of its workers are being tested for the virus. And in a statement to Checkpoint, the police say the woman was bailed on strict conditions and they will work with the Ministry of Health to ensure compliance with the self-isolation restrictions in place. The police did not answer our question about whether they opposed bail. The woman is charged with failing to comply with the direction of a person authorised by a medical officer of health under Section 70 of the Health Act, namely the requirement to undergo a medical examination. Well, joining us now live from our gallery is our political editor, Jane Patterson. So, Jane, some relaxing of the rules, but not a free-for-all, is it, the Prime Minister's warning?
No, it's not, and we saw this signalled last week by the Prime Minister in terms of those big gatherings, and you heard her refer there to South Korea that opened up part of a hospitality district, and that resulted in basically another outbreak and they had to shut it down. So really the changes today and the staggering are aimed at avoiding those big gatherings, and it's really about the gatherings where people don't know each other and are going to mingle. So, for example, you can go to the movie theatre and have, of course, more than 10 people there, but people will be distanced. But the idea is that you're not all getting together afterwards or beforehand, and you would come watch your movie and then go your separate ways. But then we have anomalies like, for example, playing sports. So you'll have sports teams being able to play and interact as you would on a sports field, but then a church, again, an example of where you won't be allowed to, and the rationale behind that was the Prime Minister said people come together for fellowship. You would expect those people to be interacting in a way that you wouldn't in others. So there are quite a few different exceptions, and it might be a bit difficult for people to get their head around it, but basically 10 people, including in people's own homes, and then even if you go to a restaurant, you won't be allowed to go in a group of larger than 10, and that really comes back to the ability to contact trace. So if there is a group of 10 of you that have gone out or gone somewhere other than your home or in your home and something happens, then it'll be much easier to say who you've been with and to contact trace those people.
Jane, why did they differentiate between bars and restaurants? So restaurants get green lit from this Thursday, right? They can open up away they go as long as they have social distancing, but not so for bars. They have to wait another week. Why?
That's right. Again, it comes back to basically what people do at those venues. So restaurants, the argument is that you go to a restaurant to dine and you intend to be with the group that you're with and not wandering around to different tables and interacting. We're in a bar, much more social, people much more mobile. Even if you could have tables in there, then people, it's just a venue that's designed for not sitting down and eating. And the definition of bars versus restaurant is going to be done as they do on the Easter trading rule. So if it's primarily for eating, then they will be able to open, which of course many, for example, local bars, will be able to do that. But if it's just a premise for just drinking primarily, then they won't be able to be opened. And, we've had some of the health experts over the weekend talking about this aspect when alcohol's involved as well, where people's inhibitions become more relaxed. Social distancing might not be so closely adhered to. So another week, it'll be next Thursday, and bars will then be able to open. But again, social distancing and hygiene will still be critical for any businesses that open in this time. And hairdressers, dentists, all of those types of businesses and services, to the great relief, I'm sure, of many, will also be able to open this Thursday. They will have to wear PPE, anything that's in a sort of close contact, but they will still be able to open as well.
So, yeah, they'll have to wear masks, but Joe and Jill average won't. What was the justification for that? Because some experts have said we should be wearing masks on public transport, for example.
That's right. And again, this comes back to the risk of the spread in indoor places in particular when people are in close contact, and public transport's a good example. And we've seen in other countries it's become mandatory on public transport to stop the infection if you don't know that you're infected. I asked Dr. Bloomfield about that. They had been considering it, but he said the evidence was actually very finely balanced, and it appears that the risks of wearing masks and that they they are not foolproof. So you have to, for example, change them up to 3 times an hour. They can become damp. You're touching your face. They obviously felt that risk just wasn't worth it. So they've looked at the evidence coming in. But the other thing that's interesting, and it comes back and underpins all of this, is that concern about the second wave, and Dr. Bloomfield talking about the silent infection that might still be out there in New Zealand. So underpinning all of these different things are the risk of one of those infections flaring up again. And he also talked about the potential to have a regional response. So if there is a flare-up, you could see some parts of the country going back into further restrictions, probably back into more of a level 3 type scenario. So it wouldn't mean the whole country goes up and down, but they are leaving open that opportunity to be able to react much more specifically if a regional outbreak does occur.
Thanks, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, our political editor, joining us live from the gallery. It is 5:20. And now joining me live is the government spokesperson today, Grant Robertson. Hello, Minister. Who's the first person on your list of people to hug from Thursday? Minister, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sorry, Lisa.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us.
Issues there.
So from Thursday, you're allowed to hug people. Who's the first person on your list?
Oh, I'm looking forward to hugging my grandchildren, actually, who I haven't seen apart from on Zoom, for 7-8 weeks now. So that'll be very, very high up my list if I can get some time off this weekend.
I'm sure a lot of people will be relieved, but there's a bunch of questions they'll also have. School, so that's back from next week. Let's start there. What's it going to look like? Will different levels go on different days, or can you give us a bit of a taste?
No, as far as I'm aware, and obviously these are matters that the Ministry of Education and schools are working on together, but as far as I'm aware, schools are organising themselves to create effectively the kinds of classroom-type bubbles that have been discussed before, making sure that they use the playground space and so on to facilitate that. But those are matters that the schools can work through and are indeed working through with the Ministry of Education. The changes announced today, the easiest way of answering your question, Lisa, don't affect the arrangements that schools have been working on.
You have differentiated between bars and restaurants. So restaurants can open this week, bars not until later. What's going to be the penalty for bars who maybe buck the rules?
So as the Prime Minister said at her press conference just before, what we've done where we've encountered issues like that over the last few weeks is that they've been closed if they're in that situation. It's our intention that the enforcement would be there. There's quite an important distinction to make here is that we did this in line with the hospitality industry, and most hospitality people are familiar with the rules that exist around Easter and Anzac Day and so on, which means that as long as you're there to eat and dine, then you can actually have a drink with it. That is the primary purpose of most restaurants. Pubs now look a bit like that too. What we're trying to avoid is really the situation that you probably have seen reported, Lisa, in South Korea, where they were one of the very first countries in the world to open up bars. Someone was infected. It spread like wildfire. We think we've got good mitigations in place to be able to manage that with our 3 S's. So the fact that people have to be seated, separated and served by a single server. But we thought we'd just give ourselves one more week to be able to get all the level 3 information in and build ourselves up to that.
How is it that we can play rugby at close quarters, but you can't sit next to someone in a bar and have a drink?
Well, it's all to do with controlled and uncontrolled environments, and I actually think, most of the sporting codes that we've been talking to will not be starting up community-level sport in the next 2 weeks anyway, because, they want to get themselves and their clubs in the right place. When it comes to professional sport, we're very much treating those as workplaces, and we've even had WorkSafe New Zealand involved with those professional sporting codes, the netball and the rugby, to make sure that they're organised. So we're treating them quite differently in terms of other activities.
So, Minister, it's not that they're safer, it's just that you're, using semantics, you're saying that because that's professional, that's a workplace.
Well, no, it is, because it's a controlled environment, and that's the really significant difference here for those clubs who are professional, is that they are in a position where they can very closely manage and monitor who's there, what they're doing, how they're acting, and in fact there's been weeks' worth of work with both Netball New Zealand and Rugby New Zealand to create safe environments for them to be in. Just the same as somebody else going to a work site where there are far more than 10 people there.
So with the magic number being 10, for example, if you want a party at your house or a dinner party, or you're at a funeral, stag do, etc., how are you going to police that?
Well, look, very much in the same way that it has been in levels 4 and level 3. And I do think as we move down to a situation where we're getting far more freedom back in our lives, that also means that as individuals we've got to take more responsibility. So quite clearly, the police will continue to do the job that they've been doing, but they're not going to be knocking on your door if you're having a dinner party. That's up to you. And I think most people want to lock in the gains that we've made. They'll make sure that they stick by the rules. Where there's obvious and flagrant breaches of the rules, just like the police have been doing up to now, that's when they'll step in.
But you did lose a few of the people from the team of 5 million over the weekend, didn't you? I mean, you only just had to go out for a walk to see that there were people who were already bucking the rules. Doesn't that worry you?
Oh, look, yeah, I mean, I think that can get a little bit overstated. I think one of the things that happened was we've been quite used to there not being very many people around, and as we move into level 3, people were getting more freedom, and as we move into level 2, they'll be getting even more. Of course, there is the odd person who breaks the rules, but actually, I think by and large, most New Zealanders have done an incredible job of sticking to the rules and had to make huge sacrifices. Now we've got significantly more freedoms back. We've got a lot of the economy operating. But as the Prime Minister said earlier today, some of our social activities are still limited to make sure that we get on top of this virus once and for all. And I would also point out, these are now very similar rules to Australia. They're only allowing 10 people as well as they move forward. And so I think, we're doing the right thing here. The economy's up and running again. Our social lives are a little bit more restricted. But as you said at the start, we've all got people we're looking forward to giving a hug, and that's now possible.
At level 2, what kind of health demand are you anticipating? Some people may have stayed away from services, and apart from that, there was some medical specialties estimate 20,000 operations cancelled. So what's your modelling telling you about demand for health services at level 2?
Well, it is likely to tick up. I don't have specific modelling on that, but you would have heard the Director-General of Health say just about every second day to people, please do go in to fulfil the appointments that you've got. If you're feeling unwell, go to your GP. So we have been encouraging people to do that. But no doubt, as life frees up a bit, we will see a bit more there. We're acutely aware of the issues that have occurred for DHBs around making sure that they had to suspend some surgeries, and we're working closely with them on how we might.
How long to clear that backlog, do you think?
Oh, look, it'll be a considerable amount of time. I don't want to sugarcoat that because, of course, there are...
What, months or years?
Well, I would have thought months. I mean, there are already scheduled surgeries clearly for now. So what will be required is how we can increase some capacity to make sure that more surgeries can be done to make up for that backlog, and we're working with DHBs on that as we speak.
Do you expect to clear that backlog by the end of the year?
I don't have a specific date like that in mind, but we are working very closely with the DHBs to clear it as quickly as we can.
The Prime Minister talked about the reproduction rate for this virus, so how many people it spreads to. We're at 0.4% at the moment. At what level would we have to increase restrictions again, go upwards in the levels?
So as Ashley Bloomfield said today, it's always a mix of factors that help decide whether we're coming down or whether we're going up. It's not the fact that we might get a particular number of cases even. It's simply about the nature of those, how it's spreading and so on. I mean, being under 1 is the standard everybody wants, because clearly once you're under 1, you're getting to the point that less than a person is having it transmitted to them, if that makes sense, even in statistics, even if not in reality. So we clearly want to keep it down as low as we possibly can, but it's not a single factor, and I know that's been hard for everyone to be able to grab a hold of, because you want single data points to make decisions with. But one of the reasons Cabinet's worked very hard at each of these decisions is to weigh up a range of health factors, community transmission, number of cases, ability of the health system to cope, and now also economic and social factors. So it isn't one single thing. Clearly 0.4 is a very good level when you look around the world at a 2.5 kind of rate that you've seen in a lot of other countries. So we've just got to keep it down there.
Minister, I see in the Cabinet documents that you were released on Friday, it said for every positive case, international evidence suggests that there are 9 undetected cases. If that's the case, we would have about, 13,500 cases in New Zealand. How worried are you about that?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a lot of evolution of the advice and the science, and my recollection of that particular number was from a little while back when people were looking at some of the early exponential growth and modelling off that. I'd want to go back and see what the updated version of that number is. Having said that, it would, the idea of silent transmission is something that still concerns the epidemiologists, and it's one of the reasons why we slowly step our way down the levels rather than leap back to what was normal life.
So at level 2, people can get out and about. They can start spending again. They can go to the shops. They can go to cafes and restaurants. So are you going to put some cash in their hands this Thursday so they can do that?
Oh, look, I'll leave Thursday's announcements to Thursday.
Give us a taster.
We've already put a significant amount of money into the hands of New Zealanders via the wage subsidy scheme and via the other supports that are in place. As I've said a few times, and I said in my speech last week, as we open up the economy more, that gives more businesses the chance to stand on their own 2 feet, be able to trade, and that will flow through the rest of the economy. We're equally acutely aware that even at level 2, there are some businesses and some sectors that are far from normal, and so
can we expect the subsidy scheme to be extended but to be more targeted?
You'll just have to wait till Thursday, Lisa.
Oh, come on. People were desperate to know this. They're hanging on, some of them, not knowing if they can survive. Can you just let them know about this?
I'm certainly clear that there will be more support in the budget to help businesses and households get through.
Got to go, but are you excited about getting out of the Prime Minister's bubble?
It's been a pleasure working with the Prime Minister over the last 7 or 8 weeks, but I think both of us would acknowledge it's time to see other people.
Also, while I've been talking to you, we're getting a lot of feedback on this bar issue. Josh has got in touch from Dunedin. He's not the only one. He says he's confused about these guidelines effectively trying to make us into restaurants in a controlled environment. The call is far too nuanced, and I am deeply disappointed after weeks of patience and supporting the government at every step of the way. What do you say to Josh and other bar owners who are in this situation?
Look, I think we've designed these rules with the Hospitality Association, and they are based on the rules about trading around Anzac Day over Easter. So they are familiar to operators.
Even though it could sink them this extra week?
Oh, look, I would just encourage people who are in that situation to hang on. I know they're all desperate to get back in and get trading. A lot of pubs, restaurants will be going, and one more week, is something that we've all got to do to be able to keep ourselves safe. But also, as I've said before, the budget will continue to provide support for businesses and households.
Thanks, Minister. Appreciate your time. That is Grant Robertson, who is the government spokesperson today. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, internal Air New Zealand documents predict it will be 2 years before the airline bounces back to 70% of its pre-COVID long-haul business. Another 700 jobs on the chopping block at Sky City. And South Korea pays the price of reopening too early. Bars and clubs are forced to shut their doors again. We would love your feedback. What are you most excited about moving to level 2? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But let's go to the headlines now with Paul Brennan.
Thank you, Lisa. Measures which bring New Zealanders out of a strict lockdown starting this Thursday will be reviewed again in 2 weeks. People will be able to move around the country but will have to keep gatherings to less than 10. The government's still urging people to keep their distance from each other, wash their hands and stay at home if they feel sick. Schools and early learning centres will reopen on Monday. While cafes, restaurants, cinemas, playgrounds and shops can also reopen, bars will have to remain closed until next Thursday. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says this is because they pose the most risk. All businesses will have to operate under strict hygiene and distancing requirements. Family members will be allowed to visit rest homes but will be strictly monitored. Masks will not be required on public transport. The original COVID-19 epicentre Wuhan has reported its first cluster of infections since a lockdown on the central Chinese city was lifted a month ago. Wuhan reported 5 new confirmed cases, all of whom live in the same residential compound. Women's Refuge has welcomed $200 million in funding for family violence services. It says the pre-budget announcement is timely, as it's seen a 35% increase in demand for its help over the lockdown. A union representing Sky City workers is urging the company to look at all options before it slashes jobs. The casino operator plans to cut another 700 jobs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, following last month's announcement of 200 staff redundancies. The Unite Union says with the economy opening up again, it should try to keep as many people as possible. And procedures are to be reviewed after a prisoner escaped custody while being returned to Rimataka Prison from hospital on Sunday night. The prisoner was handcuffed when he escaped, guarded by 2 custodial officers. He was caught by the police in Upper Hutt this afternoon and has been charged with escaping custody. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. You're with Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Sky City is looking at cutting almost 1 in 5 of its staff in a bid to save $50 million a year as COVID suffocates its core businesses. With next to no income for its casinos and hotels, the company says business has fundamentally changed, prompting it to put another 700 jobs on the chopping block. Workers' Union Unite says the proposal seems hasty and hopes the company hasn't made its mind up just yet, with hope just around the corner. Jordan Bond reports.
The Sky City Entertainment Group is hemorrhaging more than $500,000 a day in staff costs alone during the shutdown. To stem this, the company today proposed slashing another 700 jobs to go with the 200 that went last month, almost a fifth of their total workforce. Chief Executive Graham Stevens says with no international visitors nor mass gatherings, and those who are around less willing to spend money, the economic outlook is dicey. His comments are voiced.
These difficult actions will help to create a business that is sustainable in the medium and long term, and one which can continue to support the thousands of jobs that will still remain.
Jared Heer from the Unite Union says the mass redundancies are not a surprise, and they'll keep rolling across the sector. He accepts some will be needed at Sky City, but hopes the company genuinely looks at all the options and tries to keep as many people as possible.
Things aren't as bad as they looked only a month ago. If there is a trans-Tasman bubble, that should actually weigh on the proceedings and the outcome. And also, we've got a budget coming up this week. I'd be stunned if there wasn't some specific support for the hospitality industry in particular.
The top-earning Sky City executives cut their pay by 40% as the company took $21 million in wage subsidies for its staff. But before the subsidy period's even over, and before any possible targeted subsidy, it's proposed redundancy for hundreds.
Sky City's not going broke tomorrow. There are significant financial resources. Yes, they're taking a hit, just as everyone in the hospitality industry has. But, in the end, things will bounce back. And a lot of these staff they may lose are actually skilled, long-serving, dedicated staff. And there's a cost to losing people like that, so they should think very carefully.
Mr. Heer says the 1,000 union members employed by the company do have a decent redundancy payout in their contract. Without international travel for the foreseeable future, many hotels and businesses reliant on tourists are cutting their workforces too. A hotel industry survey released today showed a bleak outlook, says the surveyor Wim Rupert of Hallworth HTL.
It depends a little bit by region, but on average, roughly about 56% of employees will need to be made redundant. That varies quite considerably. Places like Queenstown, that number was much higher at 69%. I know of hotel groups where 80 to 85% of the people have been made redundant.
After proposing making 700 of their staff redundant, Sky City declined to be interviewed today. The company hasn't revealed which sorts of jobs will go, but says it will work with the affected staff, their managers and unions over the next few weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, aho.
Well, let's stick with the business theme and go to Emma Hatton with our business news today. Hi, Emma. Now, explain to us, what's this talk about NZME buying up its rival Stuff? Well, for $1 at one point they were saying. Is there a deal or no deal?
Yeah, good evening, Lisa. This one was a bit of a roller coaster ride. So this morning, NZME, which of course owns the New Zealand Herald, regional papers and radio stations, including News Talk ZB, it announced to the market, so it issued a notice on the NZX, that it had today asked the government, it had written to the government asking them to pass urgent legislation that would allow NZME to buy Stuff's shares by the end of the month, so by May 31st. And it said it wanted to purchase them for $1, so basically a nominal sum, so that it can proceed as a transaction and not a gift, if you will. And that it would basically take Stuff as is, where is, its debts, its assets, etc. It had also said it had filed for clearance with the Commerce Commission, asking them to allow the purchase, because obviously this idea of NZME and Stuff getting together isn't new, and the Commission has declined this particular merger in the past, and indeed that decision was also upheld by the courts. So we heard that this plan was moving forward and it sounded all go. I mean, and that was pretty exciting, but not overly surprising because they've been in talks for some time. But then Stuff's owners, Nine Entertainment, which is based in Australia, put out a statement to the ASX, so the Australian market, simply saying that talks about this deal had been terminated. So that was a bit baffling. The chief executive of Stuff also backed this up, so that's Sinead Boucher. She sent some comms out to Stuff staff shortly after, saying that the announcement was surprising. The announcement by NZME was surprising because there was no deal and it was unclear why NZME had come out with this. Then, in this volley of what's actually going on, NZME doubled down and put out another update saying it acknowledged Nine's announcement, but that its view was that it was still engaged in what it's called a binding exclusive negotiation period, and that it does not accept that that has been validly terminated. So since then, we've had it confirmed by the Commerce Commission that it has received an application by NZME. It has not yet been registered. There's questions, of course, around whether the Commission would bother looking at it when it would seem a party doesn't think there's any deal to get clearance on. And then there's also the issue that after NZME put out that announcement, its share price jumped up. It went from 22 cents to 26 cents at its peak. It settled somewhere in the middle at the end of the day. So that's obviously another aspect to this. And the NZX regulation has been in touch with NZME about that. So there's a bit going on, and there's obviously a lot of history here and a lot at stake for both companies, both of which are failing under their current business models, and more so because of COVID-19. So it's a real cliffhanger, this one. There's either some genuine confusion about whether, this about what this all is and whether there's a deal, or whether it's more deliberate and some sort of Hail Mary attempt to push the deal through, hurry the government up and get it done. So more will be revealed in the coming days and weeks, we hope.
OK, well, Z Energy today reported a massive loss for its full-year earnings. What were the numbers?
Yeah, so that's the country's largest fuel retailer, and it's been hit hard in the back pocket. This year's earnings were $88 million, which pales in comparison to last year's $186 million. The reasons for that were, of course, partly because of COVID-19 and the drop in demand for fuel because of the lockdown. But its bottom line was also hit by a write-down in the value of its electricity operation, Flick, and in the value of some of its fuel contracts. So to sort of make up some of that cash, it has scrapped its final dividend payout to shareholders, and also as a way to strengthen its finances, it today announced it planned to raise $350 million through a share issue. So the money raised through that will be used to pay down some bank debt and used to make sure the company's well placed to sort of get up and go when it needs to, when the economy starts to pick up again, and of course more fuel starts being used again.
And what were the market numbers today?
So the top 50 index closed 65 points higher, about 0.2% to 10,760. And the New Zealand dollar is sitting at 61.4 US, 93.7 Australian cents, and 49.4 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That's Emma Hatton with Our Business News. Today's announcement of the move to Level 2 on Thursday for most businesses has brought relief to many on the streets of Auckland. Patience at Level 3 has been wearing thin for some, and the timing of the shift is exactly what most had said they were hoping for. Here's what people on Auckland's Ponsonby Road had to say a short time ago.
I think it's time, but it's certainly really important that people still remain really conscious of the whole social distancing. You know, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. We've done really well. But I do think that we need to really remain vigilant. So I'm pleased that we're going to Level 2. But like I say, I think we all need to still take it very seriously and continue doing what we have been doing so well.
I feel good, and I actually think it was exactly what I was expecting. I think there's very little I can fault the government on the handling of the entire pandemic. I mean, there's been nuts and bolts that have fallen off occasionally, but I think staggering it between Thursday and Monday, with various venues and organisations, and I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, certainly. I've seen an awful lot of, I was at the beach yesterday, and by the time I left, it was really packed, really busy. People were still social distancing, it seemed, but certainly there's a lot of people out and about. So I know that's allowed under level 3, but I just hope people aren't relaxing too much.
I think it's perfect, actually. I think another week may have been getting pretty hard, I think, for people. Talking to friends and that, it's just got tough the last week. But no, I think timing-wise, we're down to low numbers. I think it's perfect.
Oh, I think it's quite all right, yeah. Just about right, I think. Because even I was just thinking bars should probably be delayed, or at least for 2 weeks is what I thought, yes. It was a little bit shocking to see over the weekend some of the reports in the news. Otherwise, generally, we haven't seen any bad behavior here.
No, it's not the right time. It's just died down not long ago, so it can spike back up any time because it's never gone. It's always there. I see a lot of people just, hanging around and all that. I see a lot of people just here, walking together. That's not in their bubble and all that, so yeah.
It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about the timing to go to level 2. If you're a bar, what do you make of the fact that you're going to have to wait an extra week? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Internal Air New Zealand documents predict it will be 2 years before the airline can hope to be back at 70% of its pre-COVID long-haul business. The airline is flying just 5% of its usual international schedule and is in the process of laying off 950 full-time cabin crew. It's already cut 300 pilot jobs despite collecting more than $70 million in wage subsidies and being extended a $900 million government loan facility. COVID-19 is bad news for the aviation industry, but it's rougher than Air New Zealand even thought. Taking one day in May as an example, it says pre-coronavirus, the airline would have been using 1,500 of its 3,000 cabin crew to operate its daily services. Now it's using 150 on its wide-body planes and just 53 on its narrow-body or single-aisle aeroplanes used on domestic routes. In redundancy briefing documents, Air New Zealand says the pandemic has decimated the aviation industry. An understatement, says aviation commentator Irene King.
It's just a phenomenal plunge in passenger carriage and, of course, obviously revenue.
In that same briefing document, Air New Zealand says it is flying at just 5% of its normal international capacity, and it won't be scaling up for a long time. Here's an extract.
We are now seeing the real likelihood we will be a much smaller airline for the foreseeable future, and that the recovery will be a lot longer and slower than previously anticipated.
Reiterating previous comments, Air New Zealand says a year from now it expects to be 30% smaller, and it's unlikely to see an improvement in revenue this calendar year. But perhaps most telling, it's bracing for a longer haul back, predicting it will be 2 years and not 12 months as it had previously thought to get back to just 70% of its pre-pandemic international schedule. Ambitious and potentially unrealistic, according to Irene King.
Globally, the international commentators are very gloomy. In Air New Zealand's scenario does seem quite optimistic. The estimates that I'm seeing globally at the moment is for every carrier, not just Air New Zealand, 5 years. International experts are thinking 5 years. And certainly, going back to that 70%, it's really tough to go from 70 to 100. Because that's an issue of confidence and confidence to spend and confidence in health and safety of travel.
Redundancy briefing papers to staff show Air New Zealand is considering a union proposal to cut cabin crew's daily rate by 7%, the equivalent of reducing fortnightly pay by a day. It's already been revealed that 300 pilots are losing their jobs, and the 900 still employed will take a 30% pay cut for the next 9 months. Air New Zealand's asked cabin crew willing to take leave without pay to come forward, but that leave has to be taken in not negotiable blocks of 12 or 18 months. The rehire process for furloughed crews is still being worked out. The airline has rejected a call for it to promise it won't outsource contracts for cabin crew on 787s for 6 years. Here's its explanation.
A guarantee on anything at the moment is just not possible. We are committing to jobs for our cabin crew by offering leave without pay. We are also committed to supporting our redundant cabin crew to return to Air New Zealand through the rehire process.
A grid of redundancies in the company documents is dominated by departures. All 98 flight service managers and 78 in-flight service coordinators are going. All 367 premium service flight attendants gone. All 316 Pacific class flight attendants gone, along with significant reductions across other cabin crew roles. And life at level 2, where domestic travel is back on, still might not be the lift Air New Zealand needs because of social distancing requirements.
I can tell you they will be going through money faster under level 2 with their current schedule than they are not flying at all at the present time. We know that social distancing is going to be a requirement on airlines. For an A320 can only seat at 65 capacity, and that's not break-even point. So they will be flying and losing money. If I was sitting in their shoes, I'd be asking government for some relief.
Irene, when you talk about relief, you mean a dispensation from the social distancing in some way? Capacity.
Yes. If you want to see services ramp up, my belief is there's got to be two things that happen. One is you've got to have some relief from the social distancing requirements, and secondly, they've got to put in highly competitive airfares because they've trained us so well to look for those cheap airfares. And a lot of people will make the decision to drive and not travel by air.
There's one bright spot on a very cloudy horizon. Air New Zealand says it's secured a freight contract, a 6-week cargo charter. That means 10 flight service managers and 190 other cabin crew will get a reprieve for the duration of the contract. As for domestic fares, beware, Irene King warns, because cancellations are common, refunds are not.
Be extremely careful. I am concerned that they are cancelling services for economic reasons. I do have a fundamental problem with them not refunding the airfare. Now, to me, that's fundamentally wrong, morally and ethically wrong.
And Air New Zealand General Manager Network, Scott Carr, says the airline has been working hard to add to its schedule and is adding 7 more domestic routes at level 2. The airline has again declined to be interviewed. South Korea has been one of the most widely praised countries for its response to the pandemic, but a second wave of COVID-19 is threatening its easing of restrictions. All bars and clubs have now been forced to close again. The BBC's Rejid Ahmed reports from Seoul.
The normally popular nightclub scene in Seoul closed, with signs explaining why. South Korea had just started easing its social distancing rules imposed in March after an impressive effort to contain the coronavirus, when a spike in case numbers was registered.
The number of patients related to Itaewon clubs is 54. We are continuously tracing additional contacts and sources.
It's prompted the South Korean president to warn the public to brace for a second wave of infections.
이번 유흥시설 집단 감염은
The infection cluster, which recently occurred in entertainment facilities, has raised awareness that, even during the stabilization phase, similar situations can arise again anytime and anywhere in an enclosed, crowded space. It's not over until it's over.
Those are words which may echo in people's ears as governments watch progress in South Korea closely. That's because it's been one of the countries at the forefront of the trace, test and treat policy, successfully getting on top of its pandemic and keeping case numbers low, all without a total lockdown. This setback will be a disappointing reminder of the challenge in keeping things that way.
People felt relaxed because the situation was getting better, but after the outbreaks at nightclubs in Taiwan, I thought we shouldn't put our mind at ease because we don't know when and where the virus will spread.
The outbreaks at nightclubs suddenly occurred in my neighbourhood, so I'm very scared and disappointed.
For other countries still in the middle of strict lockdowns or just at the start of easing social distancing, this spike in cases could be an uncomfortable glimpse into the future and an example of the lessons yet to be learned in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic.
The BBC's Richard Ahmed. And back home, the family of a lung cancer patient recently returned from Australia are begging for the immunotherapy drug Keytruda to be funded in New Zealand. And they've got the support of the Lung Cancer Foundation, who says the drug is a standout in the battle against lung cancer. But in the midst of the current COVID-19 pandemic, any hopes of funding is still far away. Our reporter Katie Doyle has the story.
Greg Wilson's father Beres had been living in Australia for 25 years when he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in May 2019. Under the Australian health system, Beres was prescribed Keytruda, which he received fully funded.
By September, we had advice that the lesions had almost halved in size, so he was progressing really well. He was feeling quite good, much better than if he'd been on chemotherapy, which he didn't want to do. Then suddenly in September his partner died, so we brought him back to New Zealand so that we could look after him here.
But when Beres returned to New Zealand, he got a nasty surprise. To keep taking Keytruda, he would have to pay almost $100,000. It was a devastating blow for the family, who simply couldn't afford the price tag. They then planned to take Beres back to Australia when they could. But as border restrictions set in, he became too sick to travel.
Dad's just noticing that he's losing energy by the day. His mobility's decreasing, and we know that the Keytruda works for him, and it's just disappointing that we can't get it here.
Keytruda isn't funded for lung cancer in New Zealand, meaning any patient who wants it is looking at a massive bill. It's been an ongoing frustration for Philip Hope from the Lung Foundation, who says New Zealand is lagging behind the rest of the world. He says there is no question that Keytruda urgently needs to be funded here.
There have been many hundreds of trials. Keytruda is a standout in terms of immunotherapy treatment. There are other immunotherapy treatments, but in terms of primary treatment in first line and second line, Keytruda is really a must.
Mr. Hope says some patients have been forced to travel overseas to access the drug, but this has become difficult with COVID-19 restrictions. But there is a glimmer of hope. The Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters is pushing hard for a trans-Tasman bubble to open as soon as possible. He says priority for people wanting to get to Australia on compassionate grounds, such as accessing healthcare, will be given high-level consideration. Mr. Peters says the Premier of Tasmania has already signalled a desire to get flights between New Zealand and Hobart up and running.
He's from a state which has a seriously high-performing record on defeating COVID-19, and he's laid out a plan and a desire, backed up by Qantas, to get this going. So I think we should look at it seriously when we get inter-regional travel going in New Zealand, to conceptually see this as inter-regional between two countries, in this case Australia and New Zealand.
In a statement, Pharmac said it had planned to initiate a proposal process for companies to pitch prices for immune checkpoint inhibitors such as Keytruda. But because of COVID-19, it said there was considerable uncertainty around the availability of a combined pharmaceutical budget for an investment of that magnitude, and the process had stalled. The government announced over the weekend a $116 million boost for the drug buying agency, but it's unlikely to be spent on new drugs like Keytruda. Pharmac said it would consider reissuing the process when it could, but stressed that even then, there was no guarantee that Keytruda would be progressed for funding. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Time for some of your feedback before the news. This one who says, my partner is in a rest home care. He went outside in fresh air, sun, bird noise on the 16th of March, but was told to go back inside. Very little contact with other inmates, this person says. No opportunity for walking or exercise of any use. So now I can go visit by appointment. This is under level 2 for half an hour in his room only and wearing PPE. When are these people ever going to see the sun, feel the breeze, go for a walk, hear the birds and see the sea? He is weepy tonight, gone to bed at 4:45. Devastating. No amount of FaceTime or waving at the window makes up for a hug for sun, for a little bit of freedom. Another person is asking about the PPE for hairdressers and barbers, for example. How are they going to get that when dentists and other dental service providers can't get enough PPE and they are much higher risk environments than hairdressers? Good point. Let us know if you are a hairdresser or barber. Have you got access to gloves and masks? Text us 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. This from Peter. I laughed at some bar owner mailing you about the new guidelines being too nuanced. Of course they are. We're very simple folk, as evidenced by all those in the community who could not understand stay home in capital letters. I've been reading grizzles today from some saying the Prime Minister speaks to us as if we are children. Some of the reactions and behaviours suggest she knows her audience, says Peter. Thanks for getting in touch, Peter. And Ken has also got in touch about this whole will NZME be able to buy stuff or not. Lisa, looks like NZME will get stuff or for $1, says Ken.
RNZ News at 6. No mai, haere mai. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. New Zealanders will be able to abandon their bubbles on Thursday as the country moves into level 2. Restaurants, retail, cinemas, public playgrounds and gyms can also open, but still with strict distancing and hygiene rules. But bars will have to wait a bit longer before welcoming back their customers. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The shift to level 2 means life will look a lot closer to normal, but physical distancing is still important. Most businesses can reopen on Thursday, but due to the risk of large groups socialising with strangers, bars will have to wait a week longer. However, sports, including team sports, can be played under level 2. Schools and early childhood centres will open on Monday and people can travel freely around the country. But there'll still be a limit on gatherings of no more than 10 at home or out and about. A restriction Cabinet will review in a fortnight. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Retail New Zealand says the move to level 2 is great for stores and malls, but it will take a long time for them to recover. It says the government should extend the wage subsidy for at-risk retail and hospitality businesses. The Finance Minister has signalled there will be more business and household financial support in Thursday's budget. Grant Robertson would not provide any detail, but told Checkpoint there will be some financial relief.
I'm certainly clear that there will be more support in the budget to help businesses and households get through.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson. The Director-General of Health says there's been very good use of PPE at the Auckland Hospital, where 7 staff have contracted COVID-19. 2 of today's 3 new cases of the coronavirus are nurses at Waitakere Hospital. The nurses did not have any symptoms but had been in self-isolation at home and were tested in preparation for returning to work. 5 other Waitakere Hospital staff earlier tested positive for COVID after COVID patients from St Margaret's Rest Home were moved there. Ashley Bloomfield says a review of the outbreak at the hospital was due to be completed last week.
One of the reasons that the CE asked for that review to be done was because there had been very good use of PPE, and so they were trying to look and understand what had happened there, whether there was some environmental contamination.
Ashley Bloomfield, the Director-General of Health. More domestic air routes are to be opened up after the country enters alert level 2. Air New Zealand says another 7 routes will take off again between May the 18th and June the 1st. Auckland will serve Blenheim, Dunedin and Rotorua return routes, while Christchurch flights will again go to and from Hamilton, Hokitika and Tauranga. Wellington will resume its return service to Dunedin. Air New Zealand has already announced other returns to service under level 2, saying the easing of restrictions will return it to 20% of its usual domestic schedule. A woman who tested positive for COVID-19 at the weekend had been in an Auckland jail for 10 days after refusing to undergo a medical examination when she arrived from the United States. The woman in her 20s eventually agreed to be tested when she appeared in court last Friday, charged over the refusal. She was bailed before the test result was known. The Department of Corrections says the woman was quarantined during her time at Auckland Women's Prison. The police say she was bailed on strict conditions. They will work with the Ministry of Health to make sure self-isolation restrictions are followed. Wuhan has reported a small cluster of new locally transmitted cases. The cluster is the biggest in the Chinese city in more than a month. The BBC's Robin Brandt has more.
Wuhan has been open to the world for just over a month now, with several days of no new cases. But a spike has been reported, which is believed to centre around an 89-year-old man who first fell ill with the virus back in March. The 5 new cases are the highest number of new ones there since March the 11th. China has reported 17 new cases in total for the last 24 hours. 7 of those were imported, involving travellers from abroad.
Robin Brandt reporting from China. It's 6:04. To sport now. The revamped domestic Super Rugby competition will kick off in a month. The Highlanders will host the Chiefs in Dunedin on Saturday, June 13th, while the Blues will host the Hurricanes the following Sunday afternoon. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Super Rugby Aotearoa will see the 5 franchises play each other home and away over a 10-week period with 2 games each weekend. Each side will have 2 bye rounds and matches will be played in closed stadiums. The Rugby Union says medical protocols have been developed for Level 2 and will include daily symptom and temperature checks for players and officials, as well as stringent hygiene, cleaning and contact tracing practices. The teams will fly in and out on match days by charter flight, returning to their home bases immediately afterwards. Union has also confirmed that the Mitre 10 Cup provincial competition will start on September the 11th, while options are still being considered for this year's Farber Palmer Cup women's competition and for games for the Black Ferns. This is Stephen Hewson.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has put the brakes on any imminent return for professional sport in the UK. Johnson says the coronavirus transmission rate is still too high to significantly ease the lockdown. Premier League football clubs meet tonight to discuss a possible resumption without crowds at neutral venues. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, digital contact tracing. What will it look like and how could it affect our privacy? A 25-year veteran of the cafe industry warns Level 2 rules will see cafes and restaurants fall like 9 pins. The story of Instagram, one of the most culturally defining apps of the decade, and how citizen scientists with sellotape can help deformed monarch butterflies. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. The short forecast through to midnight tomorrow Tuesday from our Met service. For all of the North Island, cloudy periods, isolated showers from Northland to Coromandel, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waited Upper Coast. Nelson, mostly cloudy, a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla to Fiordland, rain becoming widespread this evening. Some heavy falls about the ranges, clearing in Bulla and Fiordland tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with increasing high cloud for the rest of today. Patchy rain and low cloud in Canterbury tomorrow with a southerly change. Otago and Southland, high cloud, scattered rain this evening. High cloud clearing in Southland tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 6:30.
Kia ora anō, you're with Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The country is opening back up for business, but not all at once and not for gatherings larger than 10 people. The Prime Minister today laid out how the country will move to Alert Level 2 across 3 different days, starting with retail, malls, cafes, cinemas, playgrounds and gyms all reopening on Thursday. Domestic travel and public transport have also been given the green light this week, but for other sectors there's a bit more of a wait. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
Cabinet met today to weigh up whether the team of 5 million had done enough in the last 7 weeks to justify a few more freedoms. For the most part, it's a yes.
Retail, malls, cafes, restaurants, cinemas and other public spaces including playgrounds and gyms can reopen. All will be required to have physical distancing and strict hygiene measures in place. You can begin to move around New Zealand, but space yourself out, especially if you're using public transport.
Hopes of gatherings with friends and family for long-lost drinks or belated birthdays is allowed, but for no more than 10 people.
Big social events or anything designed to be for mixing and mingling won't be allowed to happen for groups that are larger than 10. Gatherings at home need to be kept at 10. Church and religious events, weddings, funerals, stag do's, all limited to 10 for now.
Ms Ardern did offer a caveat, though, that she didn't expect families of more than 10 people already living together to turf any relatives out onto the street. Schools and early childhood centres will open on Monday to give teachers time to prepare. While most businesses will be able to open their doors on Thursday, bars will have to wait another week. Ms Ardern says the Easter Holiday Act legislation that classifies what is a bar versus a restaurant or cafe will be used to differentiate the two.
We have left bars till last because they do pose the most risk. As we can see from South Korea, that recently opened up their bars only to close them again after one person created an outbreak of 40 people and caused 1,500 tests.
People will only be allowed to stay in bars and restaurants for a maximum of 2 hours, and bookings will be for no more than 10 people. Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says finding a balance at level 2 was tough, but he says the country is in a good position to move. The parameters around mass gatherings, being no more than 10 people, was his advice to Cabinet, that he was pleased was adopted.
And in fact, there was only one point of difference from our advice and where Cabinet landed, and that was just we had recommended keeping bars closed for a further 2 weeks, and Cabinet has settled on 1 week.
National Simon Bridges has long been calling for the country to move into level 2, and he says on the whole, today's decision is good news for business. He says there will be questions though.
Why, for example, can't a church or a place of worship in one form or another open when other areas can? And so there will always be those sort of distinctions that people will be wondering about. I think in the end though, look, this is welcome.
On balance, the government has decided not to follow the lead of other countries and require people to wear masks on public transport, saying there's no conclusive evidence around the benefits. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
In Wellington, people have mixed feelings about the move to level 2. Some believed the time is right for life to go back to some sense of normality, but others were concerned some have not been following social distancing rules. Our reporter Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas spoke to Wellingtonians a short time ago at Oriental Bay.
I still think it's a little bit soon, because as soon as they mentioned going to level 2, people started acting as if it was level 2. So just walking up and down here, people are not keeping the distance at all. I just find the young kids are pretty blasé about it, and the old ones like us are worried about it. I would give it another week to be on the safe side, yeah. I just, because we haven't had that many deaths in the country, I don't think a lot of people are taking it seriously enough. But I am missing the socialness and friends and everything, and I probably will go to the pub as soon as it's open. But yeah, I still reckon another week would be better.
I think it's great. I think everyone was getting to the end of their tether. I think the timing's perfect. I haven't seen any parties and things around the place. There's been days when this has been really crowded, but people do keep their distance, even if it isn't quite 2 metres. No, I think we've been very good. I think we've done very well as a country.
I think it's a bit risky at this stage. I'd be happy to have another couple of weeks at level 3 and maybe then see what the data looks like, because I value my life. Simple as that.
And that was Wellingtonians talking about the move to level 2. Josh Thomas owns Wolf Bar in Dunedin. Under level 2 guidelines, restaurants can open on Thursday, but bars will have to wait until next Thursday, May 21st, to open their doors. And Josh has found that a little frustrating. He joins us now. Josh, is it good news or not for you guys?
Kia ora, Lisa. It's not great news for us. We have taken the response over the last many weeks very seriously, and we've been very supportive of the government, how the government's handled things. We think Grant and Jacinda and Ashley have all done a fantastic job. And it's interesting listening to your vox pops then. Like, I think, obviously some people want it a little bit longer, and I may run a bar, but I'm actually quite a very sensible person and quite pragmatic. But I do think that in this instance, I think it's maybe a little too nuanced and a little bit confusing. I think the guidelines for bars under level 2 are that everyone has to be seated and served at the table, which effectively means that next Thursday all bars are going to be opening as restaurants anyway. So I don't quite understand why we can't open as restaurants.
Maybe, do you think it's because there's more of a focus on alcohol in a bar setting than in a restaurant, say?
I think so. I'm guessing maybe, and I think again the government has had to really keep the messaging very simple because it's going out so widely in so many different contexts. So I think they probably kept bars out because they're worried about bars that will push the rules right to the outer limit and maybe actually bend them quite a lot. So they're worried about those big booze barns that are just going to, they'll seat people, but it'll be a little bit loose and they'll be pushing the boundaries. So I think they're probably, that's probably their thinking, that they need to stagger things in this way. But I guess places like us, which are not that kind of bar, we're going to get a little bit caught in the crossfire.
Not wanting to be unfair, but not all students are renowned for following the rules, and you are in an area where there is a high percentage of students.
Yeah, it's funny. People see Dunedin like that, and the Studentville and student culture is a big part of the city, but we are a lot more than that. And I think, there's badly behaved students in every city, to be honest.
So how hard do you reckon is going to be to manage this? So a maximum of 100 capacity, you've got to keep people socially distanced and you can't have groups bigger than 10. Are you going to have to bring on extra security or how are you going to manage it?
We're going to be okay. We've got, and that's the other disappointing thing is we've spent a lot of the last week. We shouldn't have jumped the gun and assumed we were going to be able to open this week, but we've put a lot of time and energy into getting systems in place for level 2. And we think it's going to be quite easy to control, actually. And I think the making sure everyone is seated is a really great device because it instantly means that you can control your capacity really simply by looking around the room and making sure everyone's got a bum on a seat. So we actually think the level 2 guidelines for bars are quite realistic for us anyway, and are really, provide good tools for making sure we're doing the right thing.
Is it sustainable for any length of... Sorry, Josh, is it sustainable for any length of time when you could only have a maximum number of customers of 100?
Well, it is for us, but mainly that's based on the size of our venue and the fact that we're not a nightclub. We're not trying to pack in lots of people. Our official capacity is 130, so 100 is or 90 when you allow for the staff. 100 is fine for us.
So what food would you normally serve?
We serve some great food. We serve a really beautiful black bean chili with homemade cornbread, and we've got these gorgeous things called dahi puri, which is like a Indian tamarind snack. And that's the other thing, I guess, is that we're already serving full, delicious, scrummy meals.
So why can't you open? Would you normally open over Easter trading? Would you be able to serve food?
Well, actually, we only opened a week before lockdown, so we haven't really got to Easter trading ourselves yet. So I'm not quite sure. Sorry.
Right. So, Josh, just to be 100% clear, are you going to wait till next week to open? You're not even going to give it a go, given the menu that you've just read out?
I might talk to the Ministerial Health or MPI tomorrow and just double-check those rules. But I guess going by what Grant said tonight on your show, where he said if your primary purpose is to serve meals, then you can open. And I guess in all honesty, I cannot say that that's our primary purpose because we do identify as a bar, but we do also serve really beautiful small and medium-sized meals. So, but I guess, I don't want to break the rules, so at this stage, we're probably going to have to wait till next week.
Appreciate your time, Josh, and all the best. That is Josh Thomas, who owns Wolf Bar in Dunedin. It is 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If New Zealand is looking for a country that has successfully eased out of lockdown, Denmark would be near the top of the list. The Danes were early to shut and early to open, having successfully contained the country's outbreak. And as the BBC's Jean McKenzie found out, primary schools, hairdressers and nail salons are all back in full swing.
This must be what it feels like to go back in time. Children skateboard. Friends clink beer bottles on benches. There are hundreds of people all around, sitting outside, enjoying the bank holiday sunshine, but none of them are in groups of more than 10, which is the government rule. Denmark locked down early, before they'd had a single death, and started reopening after a month.
I think the fact that Denmark closed down quickly is part of the reason why we can also reopen again.
Simon Kollerup is the Danish business minister. What gave you the confidence to start reopening?
We didn't reach the max capacity of our health sector. We had a virus spreading that was slowing down. So this gave us the room for reopening business. And so the nail salons of Copenhagen are back.
How does it feel?
To be reopened.
I'm so happy.
And Tracy's customers are happy too.
It's weird, such a little thing, like getting your nails done, but yeah, feels nice. This is where I feel most normal.
But there are rules. Only 2 customers are allowed in at any one time.
By that way, we can skip the middle table and the middle chair to get the full distance. So I think we follow the rules well.
If I just wash my hands and keep my mask on, I think that I feel super comfortable actually.
Since the restrictions were relaxed, there has been a small rise in the infection rate, but not enough to pose a serious threat. And so the reopenings continue in stages. So much of this has been built around trust. The government trusts the people, so it's given them more freedom. And people completely trust the government and its strategy, so they're not afraid to get back on with their lives again. But all these freedoms need to be controlled. And so since the restrictions have been lifted, the government's actually opened more than a dozen testing centres. I've come to one now, which is a big white tent in the middle of one of the parks in Copenhagen. In this room, they're testing people without symptoms to check they're safe to return to work. Dr. Anders Koch manages the centre.
You need to know essentially how many are infected, and thereby how well do the measures that you introduce in the society, how well do they work, and what can we do in the next step.
Restaurants and bars are due to open in a week.
And that was Jean McKenzie in Copenhagen. As COVID-19 draws closer to President Donald Trump, the White House is sending mixed messages about the need to self-isolate. Vice President Mike Pence's press secretary has tested positive for COVID-19, but he won't be among the top officials going into quarantine. CNN's Jeremy Diamond with this report from Washington.
Moments ago, we just got a statement from the Vice President's office, a spokesperson for the Vice President, Devin O'Malley, telling us that Vice President Mike Pence will not go into self-quarantine for 14 days after his press secretary, Katie Miller, tested positive for coronavirus. That spokesperson telling us that the Vice President will be at the White House tomorrow. The spokesperson says Vice President Pence will continue to follow the advice of the White House medical unit and is not in quarantine. Additionally, Vice President Pence has tested negative every single day and plans to be at the White House tomorrow. The Vice President's decision, though, is in contrast to the decision that we are seeing from 3 of the doctors on the coronavirus task force. The head of the CDC, Dr. Robert Redfield, the head of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Stephen Hahn, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's top infectious disease expert, all 3 of them entering some form of self-quarantine for the next 2 weeks. So what we are seeing here is really a mismatched and piecemeal approach from the White House House in terms of how to address having been in contact with someone who tested positive for the virus. Certainly, you would expect that Katie Miller, who is not only the press secretary for the vice president, but also a spokesperson for the task force, she would likely have been in contact more frequently for longer periods of time with the vice president rather than those 3 doctors on the task force who are entering self-quarantine.
Jeremy Diamond from CNN there. A collective of social service providers is calling on the government to urgently increase benefit levels further as the poverty rate continues to climb in New Zealand. The Ministry of Social Development has predicted it could see hundreds of thousands more applications for benefits in the coming months due to the impacts of COVID-19. Indira Stewart and cameraman Dan Cook went to the Papakura Marae soup kitchen where many visiting families had lost their jobs and gone on to the benefit in just the first week of lockdown.
I've actually become a single parent just recently, just before the lockdown. So it's hard. It's definitely hard. Things are a bit hectic. I have 6 children. As you can see, they're kind of running hectic in a car park.
It's a cold night at the Papakura Marae, but the many kids arriving here are dancing around in their pyjamas, happily greeting volunteers and excited to finally be out of the house. Almost as excited as they are about the kai.
Numb. It's good. It's numb.
Brooke's relieved to receive dinner meals here for her and her whānau, and she was surprised when a volunteer also filled her boot with groceries. So was Shiraz. He's now on the benefit but hopes to be working again in the next couple of months.
Particularly as a family, I can't say much, this is my first time coming here, so I'm glad. At least something, came up. Some good food and good stuff.
Carl couldn't work during the lockdown, and he and his wife Nane say it's been tough.
That's always at the back of your mind that, where's the money going to come back, and, without that, how are we going to go through? The garden has been there to helping us out, but not enough to a certain point, actually.
I don't think words could express how grateful we are for the support that our local marae has given us.
They're among many struggling families showing up to the Papakura Marae for help. During the day, there's a food bank available. At night, the Marae's partnered up with Life Church, who provides volunteers and funds dinner meals for families to take home. In 3 days, about 750 dinner meals went out to families in need across the city. The Marae's Chief Executive Tony Kakes says the impacts he's seeing in his community right now are extreme.
There's a lot of families that are now turning up the new unemployed. There's a and they're doing it tough. So, any little food parcel that we can provide for them just, gets them through to the next day, The poverty is extreme, but we try and sweeten that up as much as we can in any way we can. COVID has, we've seen a lot of tough times. We've seen a lot of families who had an income one day and now they're reliant on a benefit or have to go and line up at work and income.
In just the first month of lockdown, 33,000 more people went on the benefit in New Zealand. Now that brings the total number of people on all benefits to 335,000. In the worst case scenario, the Ministry of Social Development said it could see an increase of up to 288,000 more applications for welfare. Now that massive increase almost doubles the number of people on benefits in New Zealand. Many of the families that are coming here to the Papakura Marae and Life's other soup kitchens are among those who have lost jobs to COVID-19 and who will join the flood of applications for welfare to MSD in the coming months. As part of the government's COVID-19 economic response plan, it's lifted weekly benefits by $25. But the head of the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services, Trevor McGlinchey, says that figure wasn't enough before COVID-19 and it's certainly not enough now.
As a member of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, we think that the recommendations from that group should have been implemented and implemented quickly. Going into this crisis situation, we can't afford to have more and more New Zealanders living in complete poverty. Ensure that people's income is actually based on how much it costs to live. We pick a number out of the air and say this is your benefit level. It's got nothing to do with how much it costs to live.
The NZCCSS has been tracking poverty levels in New Zealand since the global financial crisis. Trevor says New Zealand already had a high poverty rate before COVID-19 because of the impacts of the GFC. Now, that rate is soaring.
The charitable sector stood up and began delivering food immediately at the start of the lockdown. And it took somewhere between 7 and 10 days before the Civil Defence Emergency Management schemes were actually able to get started and support that food delivery process.
In the past, the NZCCSS said the government relied too heavily on community organisations and charity groups to step in and meet the needs of those in their communities. As part of its COVID-19 response plan, the government's committing $27 million towards social services and community groups. But Trevor says it's crucial that it works alongside those on the ground to tackle new levels of poverty in New Zealand. Life volunteers Brian and Jenny are seeing it firsthand.
We know the level of, I suppose you can call it poverty with the people around here. Even before this happened, sad. Really sad. And it's indicative really of how many people I think were actually close to the borderline before the lockdown happened. And now the lockdown has basically tipped a lot of them over that threshold.
The whole time we've been in lockdown has been a struggle for me. Just wondering how people are going, are they getting fed, have they got meals? It's just something that you don't take for granted.
Husband and wife Tyndall and Nia have 6 kids of their own and know what it's like to do it tough. They say they're serving food because they want to give out hope in a time of hardship.
Just being in that position, just knowing how it is, being in the same shoes, being in the same position, it's the same thing. So it's, like I said, it's rewarding as well, knowing that, hey, we are all in the same, there are times where we all we have it and then we don't have it, and it's okay to say, hey, I have a community that's available to back me up.
It's a message reiterated by Tony.
Just to whānau out there, hang in there. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Let's keep moving towards the light and be kind to each other.
For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
That's all we've got time for this evening. If you were listening to that on radio, you can go back online and see the wonderful video with Indira's piece. Thank you for joining us. Morning Report will be back with you first thing tomorrow morning with all the analysis on Level 2, and we'll see you tomorrow afternoon.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Tourism Industry Aotearoa says New Zealand's shift to Alert Level 2 on Thursday is a huge relief, and New Zealanders can save people's livelihoods by travelling domestically. It says the delay to opening bars could push some businesses over the edge. The government has signalled there will be more support in the budget for businesses and households, and South Korea is trying to contain a new coronavirus outbreak and searching for thousands of people who may have been infected in a cluster of cases linked to bars. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, in the lead up to the budget, Jonathan Dunn and Max Rashbrook with the results of a global survey on how honest and open the government is with its accounting and how New Zealand compares with other countries. I'm guessing last Friday's document dump missed the cut. And Zoe George on the fuss she caused over an article she wrote about the demise of radio sport. She's not resigning from it.